Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of Manulife, I'd like to thank everyone for being here today. We're proud to be sponsoring the Federal Leader Speaker Series. My understanding is this is the second of three. Manulife has more than 9,000 employees in Ontario. Where one third of those are actually based in the Waterloo region. We're proud to be a dedicated member of the community involved in various initiatives and functions. I'm pleased to introduce today's speaker, the Honourable Lisa Raitt, Deputy Leader of the Conservative Party. She was first elected to the House of Commons in 2008 and was most recently re-elected to serve as a Member of Parliament for Milton. Currently, Ms. Raitt is the Deputy Leader of the Official Opposition appointed by Mr. Andrew Scheer following the May 2017 CPC leadership campaign. Previously, Ms. Raitt served as Canada's Minister of Natural Resources, Minister of Labour, and Minister of Transport, and following the 2015 federal election, Ms. Ambrose appointed Lisa as the finance critic for the Official Opposition. Prior to her election to the House of Commons, she was the President and Chief Executive Officer of the Toronto Port Authority, the TPA. She had previously served as the TPA's General Counsel and Harbour Master. Ms. Raitt is a graduate of St. Francis Xavier University and holds a Master of Science degree from the University of Guelph. She earned her law degree from Osgoode Hall at York University. She is an active member of her community and has volunteered with many worthwhile organizations, including the Canadian National Institute for the Blind and various mental health initiatives across Canada. She is a mother of 2 boys who are involved with many sports organizations in their family hometown of Milton. I'd like to welcome to the stage the Honourable Lisa Raitt.
Thank you very much, Andrew. That's very kind. And I want to tell you, everybody, today that I'm very lucky that my husband agreed to come with us. His name is Bruce Wood. He's here with us today as well. He gets to listen to me every day, and you get to listen to me now. So he's down for twice the amount of pain. But thank goodness for the fact that the meal was absolutely spectacular. Wasn't that an incredible lunch? You know, I'm not sucking up to the mill so I can get a free meal at some point in time, but I'll tell you, we do the rubber chicken circuit a lot. That was not rubber chicken. That was a delightful meal and well worth it, and I'm grateful for everybody in the kitchen, everybody who works here today. I am not going to give you a very long, formal stand-up speech because I think questions are far more fun, and Ian's been preparing the entire morning, so he's got a raft of questions that'll take us more than the 45 minutes that we had intended. So I thought we would dive into that. But I did want to acknowledge, and thank you for already acknowledging for me when you came up earlier, that I do have some colleagues, I guess. We're all candidates in this election that's upcoming, going to be called at some point in time. I don't quite know when, but that's not in our hands. I understand the Governor General is out of town this weekend, so she can't drop the writ this weekend. So we have another week where we're not actually formally in an election. But I know that Harold Albrecht may be in the room. He certainly represents this area and sits with me in the House. And Sonny, I saw that you were here today. Alan, we have a mutual friend in Derek Nybor, and we'll have to chat about him later. And Jerry, you're here as well. And of course, Stephen, my former colleague too from the House of Commons. So welcome to you all, and it's great to see you all here. The topic of the election for us coming in the future, of course, is going to be focused on something that this part of the world, I do believe, does consider as the #1 issue, and that has to do with affordability. Now, I was looking at the census data for Milton this morning just to try to get a sense the differences between the 2 regions. I found it interesting that in Milton, the median average income household, which is about 4 people, is over 100,000. In fact, it's 105,000. So we have a significant amount of people who are earning good salaries in my area of Ontario. But I can't tell you how many times when I go to the basketball court, when I'm hanging out with my kids, or we go to the hockey rink, or the soccer field, where the topic of conversations of people who are probably having an income of about $110,000 to $140,000 a year within their household, they're saying that it's tough. It's tough to make ends meet. and it's just getting more expensive, and they worry about those kinds of things. And those are things that we do want to make sure that we address in this upcoming election. So you will see, or if you haven't already seen, the advertisements that have been rolling out across the country with Andrew Scheer, our leader, who is saying that we want to make sure that life is more affordable for you, because that's what we've been hearing. People are concerned about whether or not the prosperity that we're being told is being generated, and quite frankly, a lot of prosperity in this corridor for sure. 17% of the GDP, I'm told, is in this area, and that is an incredibly important statistic for the entire country. But certainly, there are folks who just aren't feeling it, and they want to know exactly what a new government or what the current government would do in order to help them get by as they go into the future. So that's what you're going to see from us rolling out in the next couple of weeks. I'm going to delve into it. What the heck? Might as well do it. I had really hoped that we would not be going down the road of negative ads and so soon. I know it happens eventually, but clearly all people are trying to say that we're going into an era of negative campaigning. And I would just offer this perspective. It is really off-putting for parts of Canada to see that kind of discussion on their airwaves. Some people say it works. Obviously, it does work. There's lots of folks in this industry, meaning public relations and government relations, that'll tell you you have to define your opponent, and that's what it's going to be about. But I just ask everybody in the room, when you're confronted with something that's negative, that doesn't seem to be right, check the source and just make sure it's right. I've been fooled by something in the past, and even, you know, when the news anchors like Lisa Laflamme on her evening newscast are saying, you really should be checking your source to make sure that what you're seeing or what you're hearing is appropriate. And it saddens me that we have to have this conversation about whether or not what we're being told is true, because technology is wonderful and our interconnectivity is fantastic, and this region is built on that kind of innovation as well as other parts, but significantly based upon that kind of tech innovation. And the reality is that with everything that's good, there seems to be something that bad that comes along. So I would just implore that over the next 59 days, I know it's as long as it seems, trust me, over the next 59 days, to be judicious in what you believe, to be critical about what you hear, and to stand up and speak out when you don't like something you hear. And source it out from the record, the candidate of record, in whatever party it may be. So pick up the phone and say to the campaign, is this true, is this not true? It takes a little bit of effort on your part, but you really should do that. So that's my lecture for the day, as it were. I'm looking forward to all the questions that Ian has for me and any questions that you may have from the audience. And I'd leave you with this before I start this conversation with Ian. I don't think I've ever been more excited about the possibility and the opportunity that's facing our part of the world right now. I really do believe that with the ingenuity and the innovation and the education and the drive and desire that I see in this younger generation, my son's going to McMaster University starting on Monday, or Tuesday, I guess, his classes start. And I see that happening right now, and I'm excited for the future, and I'm excited for what we are going to become as a nation and who we are going to be defined in this region. And the roundtable that we had this morning really cemented what I had thought was my gut reaction to how things were going, to really knowing that the seeds are being planted and people are thinking very smartly about where we're going to be going as a nation. So I got a lot out of this morning. I don't know whether or not the table got a lot out of it. I asked a lot of questions, but that's the kind of dialogue that I would say you would see from a government that would be formed by the Conservatives. Optimism, enthusiasm, looking for opportunity, looking at ways that we can help private sector come to the forefront, and getting barriers out of the way that they may be encountering. Because the opportunity, as I said, I truly believe is limitless, and the ability to lift up so many different people at the same time, I think is, we're at a defining moment in our world and in our country.
Well, thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to to join us today. We appreciate you joining us. And the session this morning was very useful, I think, for those in attendance, and hopefully it was for you as well. On behalf of the Greater KW Chamber and the Cambridge Chamber, this is the second in our federal election speaker series, and we appreciate the work that our two chambers have done to bring the issues around the federal election to the fore. We work in close collaboration. I see our friends from Communitech are here. We work very closely with Tony, who you met this morning, from the Waterloo Economic Development Corporation, our municipal partners, the Immigration Partnership for Waterloo Region. I think one of the things that struck me when we were talking this morning, actually doing the radio interview, was you said the consistency of what you heard from the broad cross-section of business and community interest around that roundtable. I think that's important. Where we work, as we talked about, with the Connect the Corridor coalition around all-day two-way go and transit connections between here and Toronto, Canada's Innovation Corridor Business Council, which is the 8 chambers of commerce, and you know that Scott and the Milton folks are involved in that. So I think it is important that you've got a sense of the community has got some common views on what we need to be successful. And then Greg and I, through our work with the Canadian Chamber of Commerce and their Vote Prosperity document, which really, we're going to cover these, but taxation issues, regulatory burden, trade deals, small business and to support them, the connected Canada, the digital economy, skills, and pharma. There are a lot of the core issues that we're going to talk about today. So one of the issues, and it was probably first, and we came through all of the discussion for an hour this morning, is around talent. And one of the biggest issues for businesses across sectors is securing workers and being able to get the right folks with the right skills to fill both current vacancies now, but also for the economy of the future. So what's the Conservative Party's view on how we need to address that issue around having the right people with the right skills for the jobs of the future as the economy changes and as the global environment changes?
Yeah. Well, universities obviously have a huge role to play, but not the only role. Same with colleges. And one of the things that we spoke about this morning is that the goal of any government is to try to help match the skills of the future with the education paths that we're forming today. And you guys did it as well, Karen, when you sat in government. And that's the fundamental thing. You try to guess where you're going into the future and making sure that you're putting some kind of efforts and training in that space. And clearly we're at a point where, since I was told this morning that every sector in this region is looking for people to work in their jobs. So that's pretty stunning, and that comes down to not having enough people in general. Immigration is going to form part of that. But as well, we have to look to make sure that those who are not necessarily in the workforce are encouraged to go in the workforce and encouraged to get trained in those areas in which we want to make sure that we have help. I mentioned in our radio interview that you're really shaped by your personal experience. And what I've seen since my older son's graduating this year, JC, is the guys that he played basketball and football with who are not going to college or who are not going to university, well, they too need to figure out what their path is going to be. And maybe it's going to be trades, but they don't know anything about what it is to be trades. And if you talk to kids who are in these sectors in trades, or if they're in insurance, it's usually a parent who is involved. For example, what we were talking about at the table, it's usually a parent who was in that field, therefore they see it as a possibility, as a future. One of the programs that they did federally that I really liked was called Taste Your Future. And it had to do, and came out organically of food, agriculture, food processing, and tourism kind of facility, where they just wanted to tell people what kinds of jobs there were, and that you could have some kind of future in these areas. So a long roundabout way of saying this: it's not only the government's job to ensure that people understand what careers there are out there in emerging fields. Food processing is a huge industry in this country. You said it's #1 here in the Waterloo area. I was told once by a farmer that we're second in North America. The Toronto area, including this area, is second in North America with respect to food processing. Tons of jobs are available, good paying, not great conditions, but it is what it is. You get benefits, you get pension, and you get a good wage that you can raise a family on. But kids don't know about that, or people who are transitioning jobs don't necessarily know about that. So it's up to the government to help, but not do the whole piece. And it's up to allowing industry and different sectors come together to figure out ways in which to make sure that they know about it. And I give a plug to the Canadian Welding Bureau that is in my riding of Milton, Ontario, who took it upon themselves to start trying to figure out how to get more women in welding, for example. Because if you've ever welded, it's a lot like icing a cake, oddly enough. That's what I took away from it. And boy, we got good skills for that kind of stuff, that detail, that technical kind of attention. And it's a great field for women if they want to get involved in it. And it's a well-paying job. So trying to encourage people to talk about that kind of stuff. So not just government, and not just regulated to somebody else, but encouraging associations to come up with their ways. And if they need help along the way, we figure it out.
And we're working with the college and the universities because trades are a huge shortage in manufacturing and other things. So that's an important aspect. I want to touch on immigration. You heard some of that this morning, and that could be one of those flashpoints in the campaign. The Conservative Party has traditionally been in favor of immigration. What's you tell us what the policy is around immigration. We need immigrants, not only for tech jobs, but right across the board. We need newcomers to Canada to fill the jobs into the future. So what's the policy, or what's the philosophy of the Conservative Party of Canada?
Yeah, I think you can broadly say that all Canadians recognize and value the importance of immigration, not just from a business point of view, but family reunification and ensuring that we're doing our part on the world stage with respect to refugees. And those are really the three buckets of immigration, right? Economic considerations, refugees, and family reunification. That's how we end up having people come to this country to grow families, grow businesses, and to make sure that our economy continues to prosper. So what we would do is exactly what basically every stripe of government has ever done, which is to ensure that you're getting the right mix of policies in place for departments to actually action. And where we're having problems right now is the actually actioning part. And if you're a member of Parliament right now, and you're in this area of the world, I'm going to tell you the number one issues you're getting in your riding and in your office are immigration issues, and it's always related to how long the service times are right now. People are waiting not months or weeks, like it's years and years. And even the MP office is having a hard time getting an understanding as to, well, what is the delay in the application? So that to me is the canary in the coal mine, that the system seems to be tottering on the edge of not being able to do what it's supposed to do. The policy is important, but it's the execution that people notice, and that's what we need to ensure that somebody gets with giving the right direction to the officials to get the job done and resourcing them appropriately. If it's about resources, fine. If it's about systems, it's fine. If it's about needing better public policy direction, that's fine. But strong ministers are important in terms of telling departments exactly what they're expected. And service times are really important to people. And it's, as I said, it's on the minds of everybody. The good news is, if you're thinking about what country you want to live in and you're a prospective immigrant, they don't know about that stuff. They still think top line Canada's fantastic. That's where I want to go and I want to have my family there. So they're enthusiastic. We haven't lost that shine on the world stage at all in terms of competing with others. But once you're in the system, there's a lot of folks who are concerned.
I want to shift to the economy and taxation. One of the things that the Canadian Chamber and the Vote Prosperity election document talked about was the necessity to have a review of the tax system as a whole in Canada. It's been hodgepodge, layered. I think Greg said on the radio show it started in 1950 at 11 pages. It's something like 3,400 pages now. And the Canadian Chamber and Perrin Beatty, who has served in Parliament, understands these things, has called for, and the Canadian Chamber movement has, to have a comprehensive review of tax policy. well, the last time it was reviewed was 1960, so there was no such thing as cell phones or digital economy. A whole range of things were not even in existence. What's your response, or how would you address that as a Conservative government? Because I think that's something business wants to see as a simpler a way of more fairness and being able to adapt to the modern economy.
Yeah, I find that great policy change oftentimes comes as a result of an action from the outside. And in this case, the reason why we're talking about possibilities of system-wide analysis of income tax is because tax changes were proposed in the summer of 2017 that would impact greatly small businesses across the country, and there was a very strong pushback. And in that pushback, a lot of accountants came forward just to talk about how incredibly complex the system is. And where I think it was rooted is the realization that it was the Carter Commission that actually did the review of the Income Tax Act, where we ended up with a situation where small business was treated differently with a lower tax rate because you're rewarding entrepreneurship and innovation. And I think a lot of folks in the industry realized just how tenuous that policy was when this government decided that it wasn't going to uphold that any longer, and that they were more concerned with ensuring that certain types of businesses were no longer afforded a small business tax treatment in the past. So what came out of it was the realization that the Income Tax Act as a beast is long, it's complex, and there is a real possibility of people from within the system in Ottawa to make fundamental changes without having public input and understanding. And I think that's where the drive came to say, okay, let's back up. We have a really big Income Tax Act. Let's figure out where we want to go for the new economy. Let's figure out where we want to go for a bigger country. And I believe that that's the genesis of wanting to take a look at it, just because that momentarily realization that officials within the Department of Finance hold a lot of power about what they're going to brief up the minister on in order to get the government to put in place a fundamental change that they weren't really consulted on enough. Because I think parents' first request was just hold it. Let's go out and figure out what's going on before coming in and opposing it. So do I like the idea? I do. What I like in terms of public policy is if we're going to agree to have a big look at the Income Tax Act, you do it so that there's all kinds of voices. Whether that's a royal commission, I don't know. Those things can take on a life of its own in some ways. But a review, look, any minister can order a review of any part of their acts that they want to. They can ask a committee to take a look at it for them. And I believe that the voice to have that done is strong and the case is compelling, and that a government should listen to that, and the next finance minister should listen to that too, whoever that may be.
Moving on, the deficit was a real issue in the last election. We know they're bigger than what had been forecasted. We talked a lot about this morning about the investments that are needed in the country to infrastructure and other things. So how do you strike the balance of making the investments in people and talent and transportation and communities, the environment, but balance that against the fact that for many business owners around here, deficits do matter. I mean, we would recognize that today's deficit is tomorrow's service cuts or tax increase at some point. So how do you strike the balance in the Conservative Party around deficits while still making the investments we need for the future?
Well, Andrew, when he ran for leader, gave a time frame of balancing the budget within 2 years. And as the leader of the Conservatives during this election, he said that that's not going to be the case. And the reason was, you get a better idea. The theory was that if the government upheld their campaign statement that they would balance the budget by 2019 that we're in right now, it wouldn't be too difficult to bring it back into balance. It's a different ball game. However, I will say this, the economic growth in the country that has increased revenues would be able to deal with the deficits that are accumulating if they weren't continuously spent. And they are being spent because the government's bringing in more money. So what I look at is I look at the projections that we did in budget 2014, 2015. And you do forecast out, as you all do in business, for 5 years. And in those forecasts, which you can look up in the Department of Finance, you will see that we pretty much pegged what we thought the revenue generation would be for the government of Canada for this year. But we also showed you as well where we would end up having costs and expenses and how much the departments would be gaining. One of the areas in which that Andrew points out in terms of spending, which is a policy decision, it has to do with the Asian Infrastructure Bank. And he's been very clear and open that this doesn't make sense as far as he's concerned, and that we should be building pipelines in this country and not necessarily investing in other countries. And that's even taken up a notch right now, considering where we are in relationships with China. So that's one of the areas, and I can cherry pick a dozen other, I'm sure, if I were given all the departmental information in front of me as to what kinds of things that make sense that don't impact on cuts, things that Canadians aren't going to see at the end of the day, and won't affect or impact their day-to-day life and what they know it to be, and their opportunity for the future.
So moving on to we could spend all afternoon talking about Donald Trump and what a train wreck that is, but I wanted to focus on the tax cuts that were put in place a couple of years ago in the U.S., trade agreements, and NAFTA 2. How do you balance remaining competitive with the U.S., and also recognize we need to diverse our markets and have less reliance on the United States and more ability to, in Asian markets and other emerging markets, taking advantage of the European. But we still have that competitive reality of the U.S. being beside us. So maybe bring those two pieces together, the importance of trade agreements and our relationship with the U.S.
I think that one solution, and it's not necessarily a solution, but the first step be to appoint ambassadors for both the United States and China. And I think without having those voices in place right now, that there's no opportunity to explain to our partners around the world exactly what's going on in the election and where the country is going, because they're just going to be able to take a look at it from the outside. So I do believe that those two positions should be definitely filled, and they should be filled by appointees. So I'm advocating that the government appoints and gets it done. Donald Trump is, I don't know what to say about that. But I would say I found an interesting anecdote. Why I say I don't know what to say is not from his personality or his style or who he is as an individual, but just in terms of the trade war that he's bringing us down. It's great concerns, and it's having, I would say, surprising consequences. And I gave you the example when we talked. I was in Nova Scotia last week, and I was talking to a long-haul distance trucker, 2 days to Boston and 2 days back. And I said, well, how is business getting through the border? Because I thought with cannabis legislation, perhaps there was going to be more tricky getting through the border. And he says, no. As long as you got your paperwork, everything's fine. You fly through. And he said, but what's interesting is what's happening coming back. And I said, well, what's happening coming back? He said, well, we used to go down and not have anything to come back. Now we're moving more lobster from Maine into Nova Scotia, where they're repackaging and sending it to China. Why? Because there have been tariffs put on, and then there's this pushback from China. So we're having some kind of interesting trade lines that are opening up that you hadn't anticipated. Now, whether or not the United States is going to be ticked off about that, I don't know. But having been in the transportation world for a long time, routes are going to find routes. And if you can get your product to market, you're going to find a way to get your product to market. Much like we ended up with all the oil on rail when I was Minister of Transport, because if you don't have pipelines, you got to get the oil somewhere, and that was the workaround that they developed and still developing, as a matter of fact. So how do you deal with the United States? Have really solid representation in embassies and ambassadorships, and trying to diversify is incredibly important, watching what's going on around the world. And,
Is there a role for the? I mean, this is one of the challenges. Is most businesses are small and medium size, and so taking advantage of those trade agreements. Is there a role for government to play to help small and medium sized business to gain access to those marketplaces?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, when we were in government, the way that we approached the embassies was that we wanted to turn them into trade offices that were beneficial. And I worked with the trade office in Chicago, and I worked with the one in Detroit on the Gordie Howe Bridge, and they were just like incredibly important connections into those local communities. And there were the small enough kind of connections that allowed small business to come in instead of going to, the ambassador to France's mansion in Paris. You're dealing with offices on the ground and these smaller type things. So I think those are definitely beneficial. And I don't want you to take away the notion that I'm kind of shrugging my shoulders about what's happening on the world stage. I think it's going to be really difficult to figure out where the chips are going to fall when the the president tweets out that he is going to tell all CEOs to cease business in China. I mean, I'm sure that Tom Donahue at the chamber down in the United States had a stroke when that happened, because how do you do that kind of stuff? That doesn't make any sense at all. And then finally, I would say that we have to make sure that we work with folks like Perrin at the Chamber, and working with Goldie Hyder, who works with the Business Council of Canada, and CFIB, working with Dan Kelly, just to make sure that we get all the voices of the small businesses and understanding what is needed and where they need to have help and where they need to have us just get the heck out of the way.
Pharmacare is going to be another one of those issues in the federal election. Obviously, our friends of Manulife and Sun Life are huge into the private sector delivery of pharmacare and employee benefits programs. One of the issues is, and we've heard this from the industry, is 90% of people, give or take, in the country have some form of pharmacare coverage. The federal government has got the report from Dr. Hoskins. They're at best ambivalent about what they're going to do, but they had put this out saying they wanted to have a more comprehensive coverage and how that should be done. What's the Conservative Party view of the pharmacare debate? And I assume, because business is in favor of this, I think you'd hear from the carriers, having everyone have access to pharmacare coverage. So is it about closing that gap of 10% people that don't have coverage, or is it about having a larger program? Because I guess that's the debate that's coming.
In the 16,000 doors that I've gone to in Milton, Ontario, it hasn't come up once. Pharmacare is not a burning issue. Are you guys hearing it at the doors? No. It's not the number one issue in this election. I know that lots of people surmise what's going on, but if you're talking about healthcare, they're more worried about wait times and whether or not they can get into a specialist and those kinds of things. Those will come up, but not pharmacare, because I think what Canadians are waiting to see is what the plan is going to be. From our point of view, if there's 10% of the folks out there that aren't covered, then we should be filling in that policy gap and figuring out how to do it. And like everything else, we do believe that private sector involvement is incredibly important. But your roundtable taught me something this morning, which really leads me to the conclusion that more work is needed in terms of dialoguing. And that is the fact that the system is super complex. And touching one part of it has an impact on another part of it, and you may not get it right. So the goal has to be that if we're going to have the coverage that makes the most sense to cover as many people as possible in the way in which makes sense for them and their relationships with business or whatever, then we have to talk about that, because it is a universe that is changing, and it's not as simple as just saying everybody gets it now. So care and caution is the two things that I would say. Having the notion of how to do it and executing on it are two different things. And I think care and caution when it comes to it, but not an election issue that people think, or even we thought it was going to be honest. It's not.
So an issue that I think will be one of those issues is the environment. I think everyone
Absolutely.
from business and in this neck of the woods with our groundwater and a lot of our environmental features, we are a very environmentally conscious region, both in business, in government, and as communities, or in citizens. And I fear that the issue around climate and what we do to, protect the globe and GHGs is going to get lost in in the debate just about the carbon tax. So maybe talk a little bit about the environment and the policy for those bigger issues. And I think, you can feel free to touch, I'm sure you will, on the carbon tax thing, because that's going to be one of those fault lines. But the environment is incredibly important to business, to our farmers, agriculture, and so I don't want that. I kind of want to get a sense of those two pieces of that environmental question.
Yeah, and if you were to pull back and look at it in general, I would say that everybody in Canada agrees. Everybody in Canada agrees that this needs to be part of our thought process. It needs to be part of who we are. It needs to be part of any government plan going forward. And how we do it, everyone believes that we should reduce GHGs. Everyone believes that we should be kind to our environment and reduce our footprint and make sure we're doing everything we can to be good stewards of what we have been so lucky to inherit. That being said, there's different ways to get there. And the problem with the environmental debate and discussion right now is that it's really too quick for everyone to say, well, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong, instead of us trying to all figure out the right. So yes, we say the carbon tax is wrong because, quite frankly, having been around for as many years as I had, sending a tax to Ottawa is no guarantee that something else is going to happen in the country. The only thing that's guaranteed is that there's going to be bureaucrats spending the tax dollars. And that is my concern, because it's not setting us up to actually get done what we need to get done. Are there things in the Liberal last 4 years that I appreciated? Absolutely. I think they did some good stuff in there. I think we did good stuff between 2006 and 2015. We did carbon capture and storage, which is a technology that can be sent around the world to help other constituents that still burn coal, because they still burn coal. And that's the last part I would say too. It is not a Canada-only problem with a Canada-only solution. We are part of a worldwide biosphere that deals with carbon, and in some places the emissions are higher, in some places they're lower, and in some places they're increasing, and in some places they're decreasing. But we also have to make sure that what we do here is going to have a positive impact elsewhere, and not just by reducing our numbers, which we will do, but by investing in technology. Like I said at the beginning, I really believe that Canadian ingenuity, I mean, we invented SAGD, which is steam-assisted gravitational extraction of oil. We invented that. We sent it around the world. Polio vaccine, we invented that. We did so many great things of innovation. I believe that within our country, we have the ability, if we have the right investment, to come up with the clean, cheap energy source that's going to replace the fossil fuels that we're concerned about. And if business isn't going to take the steps in order to reduce their emissions, we're going to ask them and tell them to invest in technology, but we're also going to promote innovation and test in technology and let them flourish and go that way. So we do have a plan, and it is not a carbon tax. The Liberals have their plan, which includes a carbon tax. NDP has their plan, and Elizabeth May has their plan. But I would say that what Canadians should be heartened by is that we all have something, and we all care, and we're all going in the same direction. And you would not see Andrew Scheer not show up at a G7 table to discuss climate. That would never happen. He would be there, not like Donald Trump, who just didn't show up to be educated on the topic. That is not on for Canadians in general, and that wouldn't be on for any government. That would not be looked upon well.
Okay, we're running out of time, but I have 3 more questions. So, and one should be relatively short. You've already taken the ethanol pledge on All Way, Two Way Go, but I'm going to raise it anyways in front of my few friends here.
The pledge, I got lobbied hard by that table. You put me next to the right people.
So there's...
I'm coming to cut the ribbon, man.
The all-day two-way go and having trains go both ways fits a number of these things. It's environmentally, a positive step for the environment, moving goods and services by allowing more for trucks and moving goods to market. there is a role for the federal government, and they've made some investments, but I guess you're from in Milton, you get this. We talked about this. All-day two-way go is something that requires the intentional support of both the provincial government but also the federal government, and I assume that's something that the Conservative Party would see as being an investment in infrastructure and for the country.
Yeah, I'm pro-train. I'm pro-transit. I'm obviously from Milton, linking in our exurbs, I guess we're called. We're not suburbs anymore. We're exurbs or something like that. There's a new technical name for us out there. But I'm going to tell you something very honestly. And people who are elected in this room know this. In order to have a project go from a theory to something that's pitched to getting done, you really need to have people in place who are going to execute and promise to execute, and then just continuously harass the minister until they get what they want. I mean, that is what it comes down to. And you have to come with solutions, not problems, and you have to bring the people with you, and you have to really make sure. I was on the other side of being lobbied on projects, and it works. It works when you do that, and the money is the money. It's going to be infrastructure, and people will figure out how to partner up and do it. But the biggest infrastructure project right now in the country is the Gordie Howe Bridge. And it's multi-billion dollars, and it's been stopped every step of the way by politics in the US and politics in Canada. But it's going to get built. And it's going to get built because people took principled positions in saying, this has to happen. And that's what you need to do in the region, is it's the pledge, and you say it in a kind of joking way. I wouldn't say it in a joking way at all. This has to happen. Your MPs have to they can't take no for an answer, and they have to continuously go at whoever is the minister and whoever is the prime minister to get it done, and take no prisoners in the approach. I really do believe that this is one of those projects, just like the Gordie Howe Bridge, is something that is absolutely essential to the economy of southwestern Ontario. So I join you there in pushing as best that I can to get it done.
That's wonderful to hear. One of the pieces that we heard about this morning, right across sectors, we had folks from tech and manufacturing and right across the spectrum. The change and the importance of data and digital as it relates to every business sector is really important. And I guess one of the issues that's going to emerge is how do we support that change and evolution in the economy, and what's the role of the federal government in doing that? So we've talked about talent, we've talked about education, we've talked about a number of these things that touch on it, but that's a big question or a big issue. You know, talk a little bit about digital and the digital and data economy.
I would start by saying this: people should not fear artificial intelligence going to displace jobs. I don't think that should be a fear point. I do believe that in fact, it'll create more jobs than it displaces. I think it's going to be one of those things that's going to be very good for our economy if we do it right. But you need to have the right policies in place in order to get to that. And a lot of it has to do with retaining the value and retaining the proceeds of development of things like AI within the country which is doing the work and developing it, so that we don't become, to use James Boselli's term, a branch plant economy on data and digital, because we shouldn't be. We should be out there and making sure that we're at the forefront. That being said, the other side of it is privacy. And did anybody watch The Great Hack yet? The Big Hack, The Great Hack on Netflix? I mean, that's going to open your eyes up to the issue of privacy and what is really going on in the world. And having that as a note, by the way, it's recommended watching. It's an hour and a bit, but it's scary as heck. If you're on Facebook or if you're on Twitter or anything, you should really take the time to watch it. That's my Facebook pitch for the day. Netflix. And the reason why I bring it up is we had a real live example of the importance of privacy to Canadians this past year or the year before. And it had to do with a letter that StatsCan thought they innocuously sent out to the big banks in Canada, saying that we're no longer getting people who will actually volunteer to sign off on these forms that we ask them to give information on. So therefore, we're going to tell you, bank, that you have to give us the data and the information of how people are spending their money. We're going to anonymize it maybe at the end, but this is what we're going to do. I have never received so many phone calls from across the country. Lynn is here from my office. The issue just blew up. It was something Canadians understood, and what they understood was somebody wanted their banking information, not somebody, the government wanted their banking information, and they were mad if the bank was going to give it to them. And I sat with somebody from the TD Bank around Christmas time, and we were having this conversation. He said, he's a senior VP, he said, I got it in my office. I heard about it in my office. He said, we had people saying, I am going to close my account if you do this. And that's how firmly and deeply they hold attachment to their privacy around their financial information. So open banking, where everybody shares everybody else's information across a platform, is going to have some really big pitfalls with respect to public policy, because everybody wants the ability to go out and figure out your own mortgage by just tapping it on the computer, but nobody wants everybody to have your information that would make it worthwhile for the banks to be able to do it. Do you see what I mean? The balance is really important. And I tried explaining this to my parents, and they don't know what I'm talking about. So the communication of the policy is going to be really tough across the country. But we're up for the challenge, and we should learn from mistakes that happened in the UK and Australia and have some really good framework, but making sure that we don't become branch plants, making sure that whatever we are developing in our country is to the greater use in our country for purposes of our own economic well-being, and ensuring that Canadians' desire for privacy is respected, then that's the magic sauce. But you're not going to do it without having everybody around the table.
Okay, just hold on here. We're going to finish up. That's all the time we have this afternoon. I'd like to invite Jeff Waugh, Assistant Vice President, Government and Regulatory Affairs for Sun Life, to the stage. If he can sneak through right between the mayor, there we go, to just bring thanks to Lisa.
Lisa, thank you. Thank you on behalf of Sun Life. It's wonderful to meet you as well. And Bruce, thank you for being here as well. It's a pleasure. I have to say I learned two things about Lisa that I have in common, which was quite lovely. She was giving advice to her son going to McMaster, and it sounds like you may have skipped the occasional undergrad class.
Yes.
It made me feel a little bit better about myself, yes. So thank you. Yes. And also your guilty pleasure for cooking and competition shows.
Yes. Not personally watching them.
Yeah, so I was going to say, I actually had a feeling Lisa could cook. I'm just really good at using Uber Eats. Yeah. That's the difference. You discussed a variety of topics today that are incredibly important to the region. I think one priority everyone shares in the room is around supporting the community of Cambridge and Kitchener-Waterloo. It's been home to our Canadian head office for over 100 years, and as one of the top employers in the area, we have about 4,000 employees here. We are happy to support them and be here for decades to come. At Sun Life, our purpose is to help Canadians achieve lifetime financial security and to live healthier lives. And I believe we're privileged to be able to do that and to help them achieve those outcomes. And I'd also like to thank the Greater Kitchener-Waterloo Chamber of Commerce and the Cambridge Chamber of Commerce for organizing a fantastic event, and we look forward to the next one. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jeff. And just to thank, as a token of our appreciation, Gregory is going to grab. Here he comes. This is for your drive home for you and the.
So we host a lot of politicians, and we recognize the fact that there is protocol in place and actually legislation in place that prevents you from receiving gifts. So what we do is we make ours edible. So there's no evidence by the time you get back to your office or anywhere else. Bruce, you're going to really, really, really like the ride back. These are chocolates, assorted flavors and things from Reed's in downtown Cambridge. So awesome. We know that it's a little bit addicting, and it'll probably drag you back to the area, because I'm sure Alan and Sonny certainly know where to take you to get Reed's chocolate. So thank you very much, and on behalf of all of us, please accept this gift.
Joining us today, to our presenting sponsors and great partners of both the Cambridge and KW Chambers, Manulife and Sun Life, to our event sponsor, Blackberry, and I think Robert is here from Blackberry, and to our hosts here at the Cambridge Mill. Of course, to all of you for attending our events. They wouldn't happen without you, and for your continued support in making these events happen. On your way out, please leave your name tag at the registration desk, and we'll recycle it for future use. Thanks very much, and have a great afternoon.